everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the BBB Standards for Charity Accountability and how meeting them can benefit your nonprofit. My name is Mara McGinnis. I am the Director of the Charity Accountability Program for the Education and Research Foundation of BBB of Metro New York. So thank you again so much for joining me today. Today, just to get started, I want to talk a little bit about the Better Business Bureau and essentially what we do and why we do it. So the BBB helps people find businesses and charities they can trust. Our vision is an ethical marketplace where buyers and sellers can trust each other. The BBB was founded over 100 years ago, and there is nearly 100 regional BBBs. Today, we're specifically going to be talking about the Metro New York BBB Foundation and its mission. So our mission is to be a leader in advancing marketplace trust and upholding and recognizing ethical business and charity standard practices in New York City. So that includes charity accountability reports, which we will be discussing at length today. But we also do have educational programs for charities and business leaders, as well as for consumers. And this helps enhance performance and impact to meet high standards and to detect and prevent frauds. So anything that might be emerging in the nonprofit field might be something that we are going to be hosting a program about. So if you're on our e-list or email list, that is something to look out for. But today we're going to be talking about BBB charity reporting primarily. So there are 64 program locations in the BBB system. We report on about 11,000 international and national and regional charities, including the National BBB Wise Giving Alliance. But today I am going to talk about the Metro New York BBB. So we have about 760 reports on Metro New York charities specifically. So when we're talking about outreach to organizations, we are looking locally at the Metro New York BBB. We are looking at the 5 boroughs. We're looking at Long Island and parts of the Mid-Hudson. We do cover New York State as a whole. So if you are anywhere above that Mid-Hudson area, we would be able to report on your nonprofit. So the question is, why do we do what we do? Why do we review and report on charity practices? And really the answer quickly is that we were asked to do it. This has been going on since the 1920s that we began doing BBB charity reports. The program as we know it today really kind of formed in 2001, and we became the BBB Wise Giving Alliance in 2001, and the standards as we know them today also came to be around that time as well. So the 20 standards cover 4 key practices, 4 key areas of practices, and that is governance and oversight, finances, measuring effectiveness, and fundraising and informational materials. You'll be hearing this quite a bit during today's webinar, and I'm going to go into each of these 20 standards, but they really are covered in those 4 key areas. These standards were developed by a national panel of experts based on research about donor information needs. There are recommended practices outside of the 20 standards. Those are diversity and pluralism, adherence to the law, and prioritizing open and ethical behavior. Some guiding concepts for the BBB standards. This is a completely voluntary disclosure. So any organization that we work with and that you might see meets standards, they're an accredited charity on our website, a charity who doesn't meet standards, regardless, they are doing it because they want to and because it's a completely voluntary disclosure. So accuracy of reporting and solicitations is really at the heart of what we do. We want to ensure that donors are not misled and that there is clarity about use of donations. So duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, active oversight of financials, acting in the nonprofit's best interests. These are really our guiding concepts for BBB standards. It's important to know that these aren't ratings. These are our concepts and our practices, but you will never be considered an A charity, an F charity. We are really standards-based. And of course, our most guiding concept is focusing on achieving nonprofit mission. So we always hope to collaborate with the organizations we work with to hope to get them there. I just mentioned this, but it's worth to say again. We do evaluate on key practices and we're not ratings based. We also look at the generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, for consistency. So the financials that we use, if you're an organization who meets different thresholds, we are primarily looking at GAAP audits. So GAAP compliant financial statements is preferred because the IRS Form 990 is not sufficient alone. But we do understand that accountability is more than financials. So we do hope that these 20 standards and they encapsulate more than just financials. So what is the benefit to committing to a BBB charity report? From the donor's perspective, we're looking for them to have the opportunity for a free, quick way to check if a charity is meeting high standards. So having that information available on bbb.org and give.org can give them a sense if your organization is meeting those standards. The BBB seal is also a recognized valued charity trust mark. So if your organization is one who does have that seal on your website, that links, or it should link to your BBB charity report, where donors, again, can validate that your organization is meeting those standards. I forgot to mention in just a quick piece of housekeeping that if you are interested in receiving the slides after this, I will be sending the slides, so there is no need to be taking any extensive notes. And I am available for questions. I should have mentioned this earlier. I'm available for questions. It's just me today as the speaker, so I will be getting to those at the end where I can give them my full attention. BBB charity reports, what is the benefit for charities? These standards we hope are helpful key practices for your organization. And we do hope that meeting all 20 of them will benefit your organization. BBB charity accreditation, it's completely free. So if your organization does meet these standards, hopefully it's helpful for you and your organization, but it's also helpful for donors to see that you are accredited for free. The BBB seal is a fundraising tool for BBB accredited charities only. It is optional and it does come with a licensing sliding scale fee. So if you are interested in marketing that accreditation, I'm happy to speak offline to you about how we can pursue that. If you've never seen a charity report, a BBB charity report, this is what one looks like. This would be a charity who meets all 20 standards. The standards for charity accountability, you can see the green check marks. This indicates that they have met all 20 standards. You'll also see an issued and expired date at the top of this report. This indicates that this accreditation is good for 2 years. Each BBB charity report is active for those 2 years. Let's say April 2023 comes around, which feels so far in the future, but when it does come around, we would reach out to this organization and indicate that this is expiring and that we will work with them on renewing all of the information once again, and then hopefully getting to a point of reaccreditation. Some other information on the BBB charity report is pretty standard. Your mission and your programs, those are filled in directly from you. Your governance and staff, and some information about your board size and the amount of staff that you have. Under fundraising, we do indicate what methods are used for soliciting funds from the public. So if you, for example, use direct mail appeals for soliciting funds, we would ask for one example of that direct mail appeal to verify its language, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Tax status, of course, confirming that you are a 501c3 nonprofit. And the financial ratios to give the donors the opportunity to see how much is being spent on programs, admin, and fundraising. Again, we completely understand that financials aren't all of your organization, but they do play a part, so we do put that information there, and that includes also your source of funds and your assets. Some general areas of focus for BBB Charity Accountability Program is that we're looking for organizations that are publicly soliciting donations, and this includes government grants. So we're specifically looking at organizations who are communicating with the public, who are asking the public for funds. We want to ensure that those are the organizations that we're working with because, again, this really is for the benefit of donors. Organizations in the news or otherwise of interest to the public. Eligible organizations requesting a BBB charity report. So we do focus on larger charities who collect greater share of dollars, who have been in business for 3+ years. But again, we may evaluate those smaller organizations, so those eligible organizations requesting BBB charity reports. We're happy to work with an organization who has requested this, even if they are not a larger organization collecting those greater share of dollars. We want to ensure that we can work with as many organizations as we can. So I am going to jump into the standards at this point. Standards 1 through 5 completely cover governance. Standard 1 is quite extensive, maybe the most extensive of the standards, so we're just going to jump right into it. The board of directors providing adequate oversight of charity operations. So this comes in different forms. We want to ensure that there is financial controls that the board and the staff are communicating. So for example, you want to ensure that the board is formally approving your operating budget, monitoring your conflict of interest policy, reviewing written fundraising contracts and expenses. Voting board members are overseeing financials. So this would be maybe a treasurer, maybe the head of an auditing committee, someone who is receiving and reviews the 990 financial statements and management letter. So that would be the treasurer as well as the board as a whole. The board should always be seeing and reviewing these financial documents. We want to make sure that there is a regular CEO performance review conducted by the board at least once every 2 years. We do not look for the report of that review, how that review went. We just want to ensure that this is a practice that your organization is committing to. And if you have any questions at all about something like a whistleblower policy or that conflict of interest policy, related party transactions, of course, I have to emphasize that you seek out the New York State law surrounding those items. Additionally, as part of the Standard 1 update in 2019, we did include a board oversight element now requiring that an organization complies with applicable government charity regulations. That might sound quite obvious that we would look for an organization to comply with applicable government charity regulations, but it is something that was more recently added to Standard 1. Additionally, we wish to call your attention to the updated disclosure requirements for solicitations for charitable contributions. As you know, there might be changes on charitiesnys.com. Keeping updated and keeping that information as up to date as possible is part of this standard. Now, Standard 2 is much easier. We are looking for an organization to have a board of directors with a minimum of 5 voting members. We hope to include diversity of thought in this. Standard 3, it was actually the most missed standard of 2020. This has to do with board meetings. So a minimum of 3 evenly spaced full board meetings per year with a majority in attendance, 3 with highest attendance if there are more board meetings. So we are living in a pandemic age. We're learning to live with COVID. So we understand that these meetings might not be in person, but anytime that an organization can hear and see each other is considered to be in person. So face-to-face can be considered over Skype, over Zoom, over Microsoft Teams. Those are considered face-to-face board meeting attendance. Now, 1 phone conference call is allowed of 3 board meetings. So if you are an organization who has 2 board meetings where you can see and hear each other, and 1 is over just audio, no faces, this would be sufficient to meet this standard. But again, just want to emphasize Zoom attendance in this new age is considered in-person attendance. Oh, and I should have mentioned that we're looking also for the majority in attendance, 50% or more in attendance for the average of these 3 meetings. So if you have 5 meetings, but you had really great attendance on 3, we would take the best of 3. I really doubled down on the Zoom in person because I find that that is the question I'm most asked about this standard. But of course, majority in attendance is part of that, which is 50%. Standard 4, this relates to board compensation. So not more than 1 or 10%, whichever is greater, directly or indirectly compensated persons may serve as voting members of the board. So you might be an organization that has no voting compensated board members, that's fine. But if you are an organization that does, keeping that lower than 1 or 10%, whichever is greater. So compensated persons should not be the board chair or treasurer. So regardless if that's that 1 or 10%, that excludes your chair and your treasurer. So your chair must not be someone who is performing role of CEO or COO, whether or not he or she is compensated. So the board chair may also not perform the charity role, the treasurer role. My apologies, let me say that one more time. The board chair may not also perform the treasurer role. And that's the reason that we want to keep the arm's length distance between the two of those. So a compensated or uncompensated senior executive may not serve as chair of the same organization's board if they supervise paid or unpaid staff members or perform functions that would usually be attributable to the CEO or COO. Again, it's that arm's length decision, that arm's length distance, to ensure that there are separate roles from the board and the staff. Keeping those separate is just a good practice. Standard 5 has to do with related party transactions. There is a New York State law regarding conflict of interest and related party transactions. I really recommend that you seek that out if you do have any questions about this. But to cover our bases, we are looking to see that no transactions in which any board or staff member have material conflicting interests with the charity resulting from any relationship or business affiliation. So what that really means is that we're looking to ensure that there is no monetary gain or value to anything that you provide as a board member without factors to be considered. And some of these factors are whether the interested party participates in a board vote, if competitive bids were sought, size and duration of the transaction, and whether the transaction is one-time or ongoing. This, again, is definitely more of a legal one, so I would certainly suggest that you look into the New York State law if you have any questions about it. Okay, moving forward from governance. If you have any questions that are on your mind, I will get to them at the end of this briefing. So standards 6 and 7 have to do with measuring effectiveness, and this was tied for the second most missed standard of 2020. So I do want to slow down on this one, and I hope to answer any questions that you might have even before you have them. Standard 6, we asked an organization to have a board policy of assessing no less than every 2 years the organization's performance and effectiveness, and of determining future actions required to achieve its mission. So all of that to say, we're looking for an organization to have a board policy that takes a step back once every 2 years, looks at the organization's performance and effectiveness and says, okay, how are we going to determine the future actions required to advance our mission? So what that might look like, it might look like a strategic plan. It might look like a year in review. It could be any policy that really commits to those practices. It doesn't have to be called a measuring effectiveness policy. That's just what we call it. So the policy itself must be in place, and it must provide that the organization has clearly identifiable and measurable goals and objectives. So that includes a process to evaluate the success or impact of your program to fulfill the mission. It is important to know, just like the CEO performance, we do not judge the process or the results from this assessment. We just want to make sure that this is a policy that you have in place that is board approved, that is committed to once every 2 years, taking a step back to really commit to that conversation. You might have the thought that, of course we're doing this. This is something we do every single board meeting. We're always looking at the impact, and we're always looking at this. Putting a policy in place that clearly identifies that this is part of your practice and part of your organization is what we're looking for. So standard 7 relates to that policy, but it's actually the written report component of that policy. So we're looking to see that the governing body reviews and approves a written report outlining results of the effectiveness assessment against mission goals and recommendations for future actions. So the strategic plan performance evaluations, again, that may qualify if they meet these criteria. If you have any questions about how that conversation should go, maybe something that inspires this effectiveness report, here are 5 questions that you might ask yourself to really get the ball rolling. What is your organization aiming to accomplish? What are your strategies for making this happen? What are your organization's capabilities for doing this? How will your organization know if you are making progress? And what have and haven't you accomplished so far? So if you are stuck and you're not sure where this conversation should go, maybe you're creating a measuring effectiveness plan for the first time. Maybe you're creating a strategic plan for the first time. We hope that this might be useful. So if you have any questions about that, specifically about your strategic plan, and if that would meet, I would look forward to reaching out over email after this webinar has concluded. So jumping into financial standards 8 through 14, I want to say that standard 8, 9, and 10 are the only financial statements that set target spending ratios. Financials are more, accountability is more than financials, and we said that at the beginning, and I'll say it again. There is that overhead myth that indicates that if your organization is spending quote unquote too much on overhead, that's a bad thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We're looking to keep these ratios in check, and we hope and we know that these ratios are relatively easy to reach. I do want to point to the statistic. As of April 2021, 94% of the Metro New York BBB evaluated charities did meet these program and fundraising ratio standards. 6% or fewer did not meet them. So in our experience working with the organizations we work with, we do see that 94% of them are able to meet these. And of course, the overhead myth by itself, overhead ratio, is not a good indicator of nonprofit performance. Other factors matter quite a bit. Other factors include transparency, governance, leadership, and results. Charities should be keeping overhead spending reasonable, like fundraising and administrative expenses, in proportion to mission costs. So all of that said, with a huge disclaimer, this is standard 8. We're looking for program expenses to be 65% or more. And the way that we find that is we take your total program expenses, divide it by your total expenses, and we hope to see that this is at least 65% or more. So financial statements must be broken out by program expenses in your total expenses. And we will definitely talk a little bit more about those breakouts. But there is sometimes a misunderstanding about what is or is not a program expense. This goes back to GAAP. If there is unclear or inaccurate reporting, including lack of clarity about fundraising affiliate and relationships, if you have any questions at all about your program expenses, what is considered or is not considered a program expense, we certainly think that you should be reaching out to someone who might know a little bit more about your financials, and you could definitely look into FASB or GAAP for that. Financial standards 8 through 14 continue with standard 9. We're looking at 35% or less of related contributions to be spent on fundraising. We take this total by finding your total fundraising expense and divide it by your total related contributions. Once we do that, that should be at most 35%. Essentially, does it cost 35 cents or less to raise $1? If so, you would meet standard 9. The denominator is totaled by related contributions generated by fundraising activity. So a related contribution through fundraising includes, but is not limited to, donations from individuals, private and corporate funders, donated goods, special events revenue, bequests, government grants, in-kind donations. You guys know. So these are what we're looking for when we are dividing them by your total fundraising expense. Financial standard, standard 10. This is the accumulation of funds. This was tied for the second most missed standard of 2020. So in this standard, it's a bit complicated. There's a lot of math involved, but it really boils down to if your unrestricted net assets available for use, we want to make sure that they should not be over 3 times your last year's expenses or 3 times the size of the current year's budget. The reason why we have this standard is that donors do expect that their contributions will be spent on current programs. And this has been confirmed in public survey research. This is all about full disclosure. So much of our mission has to do with transparency, accountability, providing that disclosure to your donors about where their donations should reasonably be expected to go. So I want to go back to this slide and I want to just repeat that one more time. The unrestricted net assets available for use should not be over 3 times your last year's expenses or 3 times the size of your current year's budget. So this is unrestricted net assets. Fixed assets like land, building, equipment, they're not calculated into this equation, but we do want to avoid those accumulating funds that could be used for current program activities. And it doesn't have to be for current program activities. This can also be for fundraising and admin. We just want to make sure that these funds are being used. However, if you have a certain specific situation where you might be over the limit of this, you can still meet this standard. You can meet this. You can meet this by complying with disclosure requirements in direct mail, marketing appeals, and your website. So where you solicit for funds, if you do put a little disclosure that indicates that this is the case, that your net assets available for use are over 3 times your last year's expenses. So if you have any questions about that, it's a very specific situation. Happy to talk more to you about that. Standard 11 is about availability. We are looking for organizations to make available to all on request complete annual financial statements prepared in accordance with GAAP. So if you have any questions about your threshold, the national standard here is that over $1 million in income per year, that would require a full CPA audit, between $250,000 and $1 million a CPA review, and under $250,000 internally prepared statement. So there are changes that are made to this, and I don't want to speak too much about this disclaimer at the bottom, but if you have any questions about thresholds, definitely seek this link out when I do send the slides. We do request an audit if required by law and check auditor's cover letter. Standard 12, we're looking for these audits to include in financial statements a breakdown of expenses according to programs. And if you are an organization that has multiple programs, making sure that those are broken down specifically. Fundraising and administration expenses. So fundraising could be development expenses, administration could be management and general expenses, but these programs, fundraising and administration expenses will be repeated quite a bit for the remainder of this webinar. So I hope that by the end of it, you'll really keep that in your head. Functional breakdown of expenses would look something like this. If your organization does have multiple programs, you can see in program A and program B, there is a difference in salary, there's a difference in postage, there's a difference in travel. These are natural classifications that are all related to these functional expenses. So why is this important? This is a critical management tool for staff and board. This tells an important financial story to funders and stakeholders about how donations are used. There is a FASB update that expenses reported by nature and function required in statement of activities, schedule of functional expenses are now in effect for all nonprofits under GAAP. So if you have any questions about that functional breakdown, definitely refer to the FASB update and also your generally accepted accounting principles GAAP as well. The IRS Form 990 also includes this, so it's just a great practice to have. Standard 13, accurately reporting the organization's expense, including joint allocations. This is really tied into standard 12 that we just went over, breaking these down. If your organization, for example, something that we might spot as something that we need to discuss might be incorrectly claiming 0 fundraising expenses. If you are an organization that does collect funds from the public or for public funds, we would expect to see a fundraising expense associated with those. That's that overhead myth, right? We don't expect that all of these funds can be raised without spending a little bit of money to raise them. So making sure that you are being transparent about your fundraising expenses is definitely part of Standard 13. If you have any questions about joint cost allocations, I would definitely speak to an accountant or your auditor. Standard 14, this is the budget. So the operating budget must be board approved. We went over that in Standard 1, and it must contain projected expenses of program, fundraising, and administration expenses broken out. So just like you do in the audit, just like you do for your 990, we would look for your budget to also be broken down in this way. And it might just be the totals. We don't need to see the natural classifications of what you anticipate spending on salaries and travel and postage, things of that nature. It'd be great if you did it, that would be quite organized. But for our purposes, we really just want to ensure that you are doing those steps to get those totals for the program, fundraising, and administration expenses. So an example of a budget that will not meet BBB standards would be what is on your screen right now. If we were in person, if we were doing this briefing in person, I would ask you, why does this budget meet? But since we're not, I'll tell you, this budget does not tell me what is being spent on programs, fundraising, or administration. This budget, by contrast, does. So we're able to see here the program services, the scientific research, the patient and community services, the public and professional education. These are multiple programs, and they're breaking it down for us and giving us those totals. And we have the total program service projected expense. We see the fundraising and we see the administration expenses. This would be a budget that meets our standards. If you do not have a budget and you're intimidated about making one, this would be a great resource to use in order to create that. So moving past our financial standards, we will move to our fundraising standards. So these 5 standards seek to ensure that the charity's representation to the public and solicitations and other information are accurate, complete, and transparent. So this really aligns with our mission, is ensuring that there is that ethical marketplace for donors and charities to trust each other. Standard 15 really encapsulates that. It requires that all solicitations and informational materials that are distributed by any means are accurate, truthful, and not misleading. Specifically, what we're looking for is a full and accurate disclosure and written and graphic representations about your charity. So some things that you might look for in your own solicitations are if your stories and photos are up to date and accurate, if there are key facts relevant to the donations disclosed, and if there are financial and success statistics. So better to avoid using these overhead ratios in fundraising appeals, because if those are used, we would look for that accuracy to make sure that the claims that you're making about your fundraising ratios are accurate and truthful to the audit that we are being provided. So claims about program success rate, are they accurate? And can you show that your charity does what it says it will do with the donation? Again, this accuracy and specificity, we're looking to protect the donors and to protect your charity. So explaining clearly how those funds will be used, being able to substantiate accuracy in all of those claims. This is what we're looking for. We really have the donor's interest at heart. Some red flags that might prompt us to ask some questions. 100% of your gift will go to 100% of your gift will go to a cat named Ruby, who has this really cute face at the animal shelter, or will it go to cats like Ruby at the animal shelter? So ensuring that there is that language that ensures that you're being accurate with your ask. If you're saying something like 0 fundraising, it costs insignificant donations, can you back that up? is there really zero fundraising expenses? I could go on and on with these red flags, but if you look at your solicitations, really ask yourself if you can back up what you're saying to the public and start there. Standard 16 is about the annual report. So we look for an annual report, and it doesn't need to be glossy, and it doesn't need to be mailed to donors, especially in this age of COVID. But what we want donors to have and what we want online visitors to have is a document that includes, upon request, your organization's mission, summary of past year's program results, roster of officers and members of the board, and some basic financial information. So your mission, what you did last year, how many people attended a class that you may have hosted, how many people attended the program that you put on, putting those success results so donors can have a sense of what has happened in the past year, your roster of officers and members of the board, who's the chair, who's the treasurer, and financial information that can be easily found on your audit. Why not just put it on your annual report? It's on your 990 as well. So this is the opportunity that we see for an organization to be able to tell your results story in a donor-friendly language. And you might have looked at that and you might have thought to yourself, well, my 990 does that. Yes and no. Your 990 might not actually have the program service accomplishments that say how many people attended that class or that program, how many people are participating with something that you put on. Those success statistics are really what we're looking for in your annual report. And you've looked at a 990, I've looked at a 990. I would not consider that to be a donor-friendly report. So having this annual report is something that we do consider to be a requirement for our standards, just because it tells that story. So an online digital report is acceptable as long as a hard copy is mailed to those who request it. So let's say that you have all of this information on one web page and you can easily identify all of these pieces that we're looking for. As long as someone who is offline requests that information, that's fine by us. But not qualifying would be website details that cannot be printed or sent as a document when requested. So if this is only available for people who have online access, that wouldn't quite meet. We want to ensure that all donors, regardless if they have access to online information, have this in front of them. It doesn't need to be glossy, it doesn't need to be expensive. Standard 17 is website disclosures. This applies if organizations' websites solicit for donations by any means. So it's 2021. I think it's fair to say most organizations have a donate button on their website. This applies to any organization who has a donate button on their website. But it also applies to organizations who are requesting mailed contributions or asking donors to call in or text a contribution. So at any point on your website, if you're asking for solicitations and funds, this applies to you. So your organization must have all information from the annual report, a mailing address, electronic access to the most recent 990 with an appropriately labeled link. So let's say, for example, that you have the annual report, you meet standard 16, you're able to provide us this annual report. If that is published on your website, great. You would be able to meet part of this standard by having that just right up and available. It has all of the criteria that we're looking for. Your mailing address, just to add another layer of legitimacy to your organization, and your 990. Again, it can be found very easily. Why not just put it on your site to add that another level of transparency? Standard 18 is related to your privacy policy and addressing privacy concerns of donors. So ensuring that there is a clear and accessible privacy policy link on any website that includes what information is being collected, how to contact the charity to review and correct the information, how to tell a charity not to share personal information, and what security measures are in place. So basically the who, what, where, when, why of your privacy policy is ensuring that donors have all the information in front of them so they can reasonably expect what information is being collected and how it will be used. If they're going to be added to a mailing list, if they're going to be receiving direct mail appeals, best to give them that disclosure right up front. So meeting standard 18, if your organization is sharing personal information to third parties about a donor or an online visitor, giving them the option to opt out of that is really important for transparency. You know, the most common thing I hear from donors or anyone who files a complaint against a charity is that they want to be removed from their mailing list. If a donor comes to me, that means that they had a really difficult time doing it themselves. So making that as easy as possible for donors and online website visitors, anyone who's on your email list, make it easy for them to unsubscribe. If you are requiring a little bit of resource, you don't know where to start with your cyber and data security, there are some pieces of information. The BBB itself has a cybersecurity resource, so I would advise looking into that. This is just information about data security. This is not part of BBB standards, but we do want to provide you with as many resources as we can. Standard 19 is related to cause-related marketing. So this is when a for-profit business and a nonprofit business work together to find that mutual benefit, right? So clearly disclosing how the charity benefits from the sale of products or services that state or imply that the charity will benefit from a consumer sale or transaction. More easily put, an example of this would be 5 cents will go to the ABC charity of every bottle of juice sold in April 2021 up to a maximum of $500,000. So this charity and this juice company are working together to raise funds for that charity. So some specifics: how much is donated to which charity, nature of offer, time frame, and any dollar limitations to the offer. ABC charity must be a real charity. This, of course, should go to a real charity. And if you have any questions, if you're in New York about cause-related marketing, if you would like to begin engaging in that, there is quite a bit of information about that on this link. There is a new law in effect to be determined in California. So if you have any questions about California and cause-related marketing, we are in Metro New York. I'm not sure that you would. But if you do, it's important to go directly to the source there. Standard 20 is related to complaints. Charities must respond promptly to complaints brought by a local BBB or the Wise Giving Alliance. So if we receive a complaint that we are able to pursue, let's say, for example, that your organization said, hey, if you donate over $50, we'll send you a free t-shirt, and the donor never gets that t-shirt, then they might be able to, or they would be able to file a complaint to us. And at that point, we would reach out to the organization and hopefully mediate it between the donor and the charity so that they can find that desired resolution fulfilled. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to let me know. I'm not sure that this is a standard that is easily missed. I would say it might be easily met. Organizations that I have found that receive a complaint are very quick to rectify the situation, and that's just a great indicator of a charity who really prioritizes and takes care of those donors. Our top 10 missed standards, I mentioned this a few times throughout our presentation today, but it is important to just go over them and see if this might be something that your organization might need a little bit of help with. So for example, board meeting attendance. If you are lower than 50%, if you're not having at least 3 meetings a year, looking into that and seeing how board engagement you might improve. Effectiveness policy and effectiveness reporting. So again, this is like your strategic plan adjacent policy and reporting on the effectiveness assessment that happened. Unrestricted ending net assets. So again, if you're 3 times past your current year's expenses, is sitting in your unrestricted net assets, making sure that you're either disclosing that or budgeting for more expenses in the next year. BBB standards for charity accountability can be easily found here, and there is an implementation guide about how to implement these standards. These standards don't really change very often. If anything, they may be updated very infrequently. For example, in Standard 1, we did add that little disclaimer, that new caveat that indicates that an organization must be complying with local government in terms of the way that they operate, right? This is something that we implemented recently, but the standards themselves have stayed quite a bit the same since they were founded around 2001 and 2003. The disclosure process is quite simple. If your organization is looking to become BBB accredited or simply to just begin a BBB charity report, since we have developed this relationship and you have listened to me for the past 46 minutes, I would be happy to answer your questions and speak with you directly. At that time, what I would do is I would put your email in our database, and then you yourself could go right into our database and begin the evaluation process. You would then work with us to work out any standards that you might not be meeting. So if you forgot to put something in your evaluation, if you have any questions about something, maybe like your budget, your measuring effectiveness policy, we're happy to work with you one-on-one and directly to get to that place of resolution and to resolve it. Hopefully at that time, you would meet all 20 standards. You would receive a draft report that indicates that we will be publishing this report on our site. If you have any requests for edits, let's say maybe your board chair changed in the time that you began the evaluation, we could update that and then we would publish that within a week. So if you have any questions about that, and I do see that someone does have a question, how often do we need to fill out the BBB questionnaire or to go through this evaluation process? This happens once every 2 years. So when you have that report published on our website, there is that issued and expired date. This indicates that we will be reaching out to your organization about 5 months ahead of your expiration date to ensure that we get a new renewal on the books and we get started on the evaluation. Another question I often receive is, how long does the process take from start to finish, from the time that you press submit your evaluation to the time that it's published? Really, it just depends on how well that application for evaluation and charity accreditation was filled out. So if we have all of the information in front of us that meets our standards, it would be quite quick. That would be a pretty quick evaluation. If we didn't have any clarifying questions, most often we do have a clarifying question. So it's just a matter of when we are able to find that resolution. If it's something like you forgot to upload the budget and you have it on hand, pretty easily done. If you have to create a budget, that might take a little bit more time. So it's definitely charity by charity and very specific to them. The New York State and Attorney General Charities Bureau website can be found here. I mentioned this quite a bit, and I really have to emphasize it again. I am not a lawyer. I am not an accountant. I am just like everyone else, and I go to this website to find out the regulatory information, any guidance about conflict of interest policies, board duties. This is what I have to do as well. I am not an attorney. FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board. This is where you might find any nonprofit accounting standards updates, significant new guidance for changes in financial reporting for nonprofits. Again, nonprofit regulations, the Lawyers Alliance for New York. So if you meet all 20 standards, your organization is considered automatically an accredited charity. So there is no cost, zero cost for BBB charity report development or BBB accreditation without seal use. So if a donor or a web visitor goes to our website and they look up your organization and they can easily find that you meet all 20 standards, you're an accredited charity. If you would like to use the BBB seal, which is in the right top corner, for your marketing purposes, to put on direct mail appeals, to put on your website, that is something that you can license and that you're eligible to become a BBB charity seal holder if you're an accredited charity. So the BBB seal can be used on your solicitations and website with a licensing fee based on a sliding scale, and if you sign a licensing agreement. Only BBB accredited charities may join this optional program. This would be an example of what a BBB seal might look like if you do opt into the BBB seal program as an accredited charity. And here is what the report would look like. If you click right to it, and it'll link right here, you'll see this organization meets all 20 standards, and you'll see those green check marks that verify it. And at this time, I'm all set. Thank you all so much. If you have any questions, I'll stay on the line. It's 1:50, so this was scheduled for another 10 minutes. I'll stay on the line for another 5 or so minutes to see if I'm receiving any questions. But I did answer the question earlier, which is how often to renew your charity report. It's good for 2 years. So I hope that was clear. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will conclude this webinar. Okay, not seeing any questions coming through at this time, so I am going to end the webinar. If you think of something that's on your mind later, I'm happy to answer those questions directly. You can email the charity@newyork.bbb.org. I will personally be sending you slides right after this, so you'll have access to my direct email and my direct phone number if you would like to have a call about anything that you might have a question about. I am easily available and happy to help. So I hope that you take care, that you have a rest of a wonderful Wednesday afternoon. Bye, everyone.